just did it to speaker and it worked for me, but
Yeah, it just wants to feature you. That's okay. I'll talk and then maybe I'll just like do some zany things. Hello, everybody. Welcome to my channel. My name is Margaret Pinard. Thanks for joining us. You're on BookTube. Today is a very special video day. I've got a guest with me who I will introduce in a moment. I just wanted to say that this is a 6-month anniversary for me on BookTube as well, so that's kind of thrilling. It produces all these reflective thoughts and, thoughts of why are we here, and funnily enough, I've been staring at this little booklet on my desk. And so that helped me with those questions and pointed to me to think about community building and what kind of community I'm looking for and trying to build here on BookTube. So this is the story that goes behind this that leads into my introduction of Laura. Several years ago, we had these mini notebooks, and it's got a sort of manifesto on the back. And so that's what I started like pondering and poring over and thinking about it as it pertains to me. So little did she know, like years down the line, this would be percolating in someone's brain still, right? But Main Street Writers Movement, see if we pick that up there, is a movement that started in Portland, Oregon with Laura Stanfill of Forest Avenue Press. She's here with us today, and the way I would introduce her is saying she's a powerhouse dynamo with a heart of gold that she wears on her sleeve. So I'm glad she's connected with us today to talk a little bit about literary community building in Portland and just sort of how we're weathering the version of that stays with us during the pandemic. So welcome, Laura.
thanks so much, Margaret. Yay.
Yeah. So you say in your email signature, novelist, publisher, mom. So you've got 3 of those identities. And today I think we're going to focus mainly on the community around publishing and maybe novelists. So we'll see what sneaks in there. First of all, how are you doing so far in the end of February 2021 in terms of all these circles?
Well, I thought 2021 would be better, and it's not. And I fell on a mossy rock on January 1st. And so that was my first tip off that even though we had been looking forward to the calendar shift and the new year, that COVID's still here and things are still really challenging. Trying to balance everything is incredibly difficult, but it's been fruitful also because I had to deconstruct all of the ways I operated as a human being, as a parent, as a publisher, and rebuild them from the ground up in COVID times where my kids are around all the time.
The monologuers, the new play coming out next year.
Yeah, they have constant monologues are running in the background, and I try to listen most of the time. And sometimes I say, are you just saying this for yourself, or do you want me to respond? Because I'm not really paying attention.
Right. The changes in our living situations, for sure. Yeah. So I was going to dive in and take some of the things that are on this. Let's see if we can give a little shot of that. I may do a still later. But build your community. Did you think of these over a period of time? Did you get community input from your Forest Avenue readers? Like, how did this come about for the background?
Well, I was doing some big picture visioning for the business with my friend Nicole Patulski, who worked as a consultant to businesses. And as we drilled down into who I am as a person, what I wanted for my business, we kept coming back to community. So she encouraged me and inspired me to create the Main Street Writers Movement around what I do every day and as a publisher and as a writer. Knowing that I've been modeling that community building for years, she thought it would be really empowering and helpful to put words to it and put concepts down on paper and then invite other people to do the same thing.
Yes, join me in my party, right? I'm having it on my own, so you might as well join in. Yeah. Yeah. Well, very cool. So the first one, read diversely and locally. So I kind of put down some thoughts about how this might change during the pandemic, because I think you envision this as a lots of people getting together and breaking bread and picnics in the park and that sort of thing. But we can do pandemic edition since it's still continuing. Um, I have my notes saying, let's see, look for lesser known titles and marginalized voices to highlight, follow diverse booktubers, watch their content, and then also check out booksellers online and social media and libraries. So they've seemed to like grow into a huge role in the virtual space, which is pretty cool. So what would you say is your original intent, and then how have you pivoted for reading diversely and locally?
Uh, I think your ideas for the online piece are really good. I've spent more time being sad about bookstores being closed and not being able to have that in-person community than I have coming up with solutions. So you
Wintering,
know,
you're wintering.
I'm a fallow field at the moment, but my original intent was the idea of encouraging people to read outside of whatever boundaries they've set for themselves, whether it's a genre boundary or encouraging people to read books by people who are different than they are, and however you want to phrase that. And I really thought about it in terms of the bookstore model, where encouraging people to go into their local bookstore and see what's on their local shelf. And of course, that's not really a thing right now. Some bookstores for sure are open around the country, but a lot aren't, or they're open for limited browsing. And so it's harder to do it. I think that I guess the one way I've pivoted is I've been reading a lot more online articles, essays, and I found those usually through social media. It's either something someone posts or I know the author. And so I have been, but it hasn't been local the way it used to be. It's more piecemeal, but I've definitely been reading voices I hadn't read before because I'm reading short pieces.
And that may be a different pot of writers that have short pieces published online than the people who we usually see in local sections in bookstores, right?
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that's great. That's great. Um, when you're talking about that, I was gonna apologize for the cattail because I have a he's elsewhere in the room, however, so we're good.
I was very
Um,
pleased by the cattail.
what?
I was very pleased by the cattail.
He likes to guest star sometimes, having a cameo or whatever. So the video that I just watched yesterday was I found Microcosm has their own channel on YouTube, and I was like, oh, and they just posted a thing about how the pandemic continues to influence publishing and distribution, and how that sort of works through the industry, and booksellers end up saying, sorry, I can't get your book because of this, and there's a whole like background behind them, and that was interesting to hear about. So there's another viewpoint that I don't often know, which is distributors and their woes and tribulations with these issues.
Yeah, it's definitely changed the business. We get regular updates from our distributor about what the latest adjustment has been or might be. And it's a lot of it doesn't impact me. I don't do gift sales, for instance. So anything about museums or doesn't really impact me. But it's interesting to watch it from that different angle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then what's going on.
Yeah. All right. We've got publicly adore the books you love. Effective praise is genuine and not issued as a favor. So publicly adore. I think we both love doing that. So
yeah, absolutely. You with your booktube channel and social media, and same with me.
yeah.
It's true praise means so much to the author. And one of the things I've found that beginning writers and beginning reviewers tend to do is praise lavishly whether or not they love a book. And so one of the things about Main Street is it works if you're genuine. It's important to praise other people's books if you're an author, because when it's your turn, you don't want to say, buy my book, buy my book, buy my book, buy my book, and not have been sitting around saying that read this book or read that book. So building a community around other authors and what they've put together is important. And if you haven't read a book and you want to promote it, you can still share out the link to the event, or a YouTube appearance, or a picture of the cover and say this is launching. You don't have to necessarily review a book for the author to be grateful,
Right.
or to build your audience. You can let people know about a book that you haven't read, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
So I just caution against the false praise thing, because it eats away at that boundary and makes a person maybe seem or appear less genuine than they are, or than they should, that they want to be. So
Right. Yeah. I TBRs are great for that. So that's an Instagram thing, but also a booktube thing. And I don't think well, I don't know. I don't know the behind the scenes for other booktubers, but TBR lists is just books that you intend to read for the month or for whatever period. And it's like things you're excited about, and you don't know how it's going to turn out, but you're excited about it. So you pass on that enthusiasm. And that's a great way to publicly adore if you know the person or know them by reputation, or, just want to highlight books by people who are not like you. And that's your chance. So
it's so smart, and it gives readers and other booktubers and other bloggers and reviewers a chance to see what you're interested in, and that gets the name in their consciousness. You have to see the name of a book a number of times, from the marketing perspective, before it really sinks in. So even a small mention like that really matters to the author and the publisher.
yeah, yeah. I've heard widely varying numbers in terms of how many times you need to see something before you feel like you know it, or like the habits, how many times you have to do a habit before it's ingrained, that sort of thing. Actually, the two link, because sometimes I'll see something and forget to make a note, and sometimes I'll see it again and go, oh, wait, did I hear about that? And then look, and I did make the note, but if I don't follow through on the habit, I do need to see it again. And my process right now is that I will see a video, see a book that I think I would like, and then put it on Storygraph. Have you heard of Storygraph and all the new business? So it's basically like the new alternative to Goodreads, because they don't care about the readers. Well, okay, so I came across it because I knew Seiji, the artisan geek, who is on YouTube. It was one of her friends who is a Black creator, and someone else. So I don't know anything about the other partner, but I think it started by two people as an alternative to try to get something that's more what people want from a book tracker rather than what, marketers want. Yeah, so I see a video and I put it on with a tag, and it says, the person who recommended it, so that I can go back and because I never remember that, who recommended this to me? I want to go back and tell them how it was. And yeah, so that's my process. And sometimes if it misses, I need a second time to see it to remind me to do that. All right, the next one is skip the Zon and link to indiebound.org, where users enter their zip codes to identify their closest indie bookstore. And so the spirit behind this is obviously go local, support small businesses, support people who are actually thinking through intentionally what they're buying, and not just selling everything under the sun and cheating everyone along the way. Yeah.
Margaret, that's it. There's another way to do it. IndieBound was really the only other option up until fairly recently, when bookshop.org came about. And you can actually support all local indie bookstores by just buying from bookshop.org, or you can pick a favorite indie bookstore and have any online purchases go through that store. So I rotate a little bit depending on who I want to support at the time. If I decide I need to order something online, I go to bookshop.org, and then I look for the bookstore I want to support.
Right. Yes.
So yeah, that's a new thing. And IndieBound, it was really good, but it was a little bit clunky because you then had to go to the store website, and then you might not be able to get what you have, whereas bookshop.org is run through the Ingram catalog.
Yes, and I will say, Joe, in another video I watched, said it's funny when you go from one monopoly to a slightly better one to solve your problems, because Ingram's the only wholesaler at the moment in the U.S.
Yeah, Baker and Taylor was, but they've shuttered that part of their business. So
Yeah. So what's funny is that if I go on IndieBound, they have all of my books, but if I go on Bookshop, they only have 3.
interesting.
Yeah, so there's still like clunkiness in the system as far as I'm concerned, but that may be my bad. I'm working through all those like, channels and everything. So,
I bet it's something in metadata that you can go back through and see what distribution channels you've picked for the books that aren't available, and then see if you can tech it.
yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. It's that fun stuff that every author dreams of doing for their book business, right?
Isn't that what being an author is all about? Metadata.
Metadata, yeah, tags. All right. So yes, how to buy your books. That's great. And I'll just say, we have another guest coming on in March, Mary O'Malley Weber, who is a virtual bookseller for Skylark Books. She's fabulous. We're going to be talking about how you judge people by what they read and like how to change that if you want, or like maybe consider how it's affecting your reading. And we're going to be talking a little bit about how books get to people in terms of distribution and all that. So that should be interesting on March 14th.
Oh, that'll be great.
Yeah. We have set up a literary networking event, which I think we can skip for the time being.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking even the whole idea about supporting indie bookstores is so that they survive, so that the money stays in the economy, and so we can all gather and get to know each other in an actual space within our communities. And right now, that's just not safe. So
yeah. So how are we gathering? How are we?
We're doing this, right? We're on Zoom, but I know a lot of writing groups are still meeting, and some have begun because of the pandemic and the need to gather and not just be in your own world, in your own head all the time.
Yeah. It's mainly Zoom and texting, I think, for keeping in touch, and letters. I could put a video up about letters and postcards, and that's I mean, I haven't seen the plethora. I haven't seen the mountain, of letter writing come back, but there's still hope. I mean, starting a trend. I don't know.
I'm right there with you. I've been writing letters throughout the pandemic and making little pieces of art to send to people, just as a way to find my joy and as a way to spread my joy, or just say I'm thinking about you.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. How's your post office been doing? Because whenever I go to deliver things that aren't just plain letters, there's 4 people allowed in that little box, and like the lines sometimes out the door, and you have to try to find a time to go where you're not going to be incommoding people. And
it's difficult. We had 2 local post offices in my area that they both closed over, I think, within 3 or 4 years of each other. And so
they closed, not because of the pandemic, just because of.
No, this was before the pandemic, and one of them was in a grocery store that closed, and one of them was in a little strip mall in the neighborhood community. And the regulations around contract post offices changed, so that was part of it. I used to be able to walk to the post office, and then I used to at least get my groceries and go to the post office, and now we have to go to the one box, and it's difficult. And disappointing, I think. I mean, they do the best they can, it's fine, but we used to have other options, and seeing those shrink is hard.
Yeah.
I mean, much like anything, right? We used to have a lot of options, and now we have very few options in COVID, and that's part. There's some, I hesitate to say relief, but there is some relief connected, for me at least, about the limiting of options and recognizing, okay, this is possible and all these things are not. So within this possibility, where can I find joy? Where can I bring joy to others? How can I commit to my craft? I definitely, as we've talked about community and going out to events, we used to go out to events all the time. I mean, we collectively, lots of us, especially in Portland, I feel like everybody was always going out to support someone else. Presses were supporting each other. Authors were supporting each other. Readers were coming out to listen, find their new favorite books. People were just always showing up. And it's a lot when you try to go to everything or many things. certainly there were always events, 2 or 3 events on the same night sometimes, and then you had to choose. And there were times when there was a conflict with something besides literary world, and I couldn't go to something. But I definitely felt like a big chunk of my life was about going into these spaces and interacting and connecting. And it can be tiring after a while. So now we have to reconsider how we interact and build community, which is, I guess, the entire point of our conversation today.
Yeah. 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 So the reason I started on BookTube is because I had been trying to sort of push a little bit on all the social media fronts and felt really like too much butter scraped over toast, or however the Bilbo Baggins quote is. And the Willamette Writers Conference had a social media speaker that actually said, choose your lane, like pick something and go with it before you try to do all the things at once. And I was like, yes, that's very sound advice. I don't know why I haven't been able to choose. Oh, wait, that's because I can never choose anything. So that's when I thought, well, what medium do I like best? What thing is easiest for me? Which is not a pain every time I contemplate, learning. And surprise, I chose video, which is strange. So, but it's working because it's a little bit of performance because you have to script and prepare, but it's also interaction because a lot of the point of the videos is interact with people in the comments, and they will give you really reflective and thought-provoking comments about what you say, and you're like, wow, like this is like a conversation. So it's like kind of like being with people. It's great.
Well, and the amount of information you can share is different than in, say, a tweet.
Right.
And then, yeah, the interactivity is fascinating to me. I don't know much about BookTube, but it feels really important to be able to listen to each other right now and respond so that the person speaking hears that they've been heard and then can respond, and that there's a humanity to that kind of interaction that's different from sharing a link and sharing another link and sharing another link. There's the conversational aspect sounds really good.
Yeah, even if it is more screen time. Okay, so let's do seek opportunities to amplify authors of color. And I had thought about reading choices, discussion choices, retweets, reposts, the time spent watching, having special guests, readathons, and challenges. Oh, okay. So those are Storygraph and Litzy things. Go ahead and tell me how you were thinking about this. Is this 2016?
It might have been 2017, I think. Yeah, it was the year that AWP was in Washington, D.C., the Association of Writers, and whatever that stands for. I don't know. I can't remember now. AWP. People were certainly talking about diversity and the issues, the lack of diversity in publishing already. And to me, that's one of the core values of Main Street, and a core value for me as someone who gets to choose manuscripts to publish, as well as choose books I get to read myself. And in some ways, I don't think my view on that has changed, or except, I mean, I don't think I've pivoted in any way, except I can't go into a bookstore and look for a book by an author of color. I have to look for it through social media or look through it online and order it. But everything you said remains true and important. It's so important. It always has been. And I feel like the increased conversation around diversity in publishing is a good thing. And it also shows us how far we have to come. Like there's still a lot of work to be done.
Yeah. I saw a recent tweet that was about, I think it was actually for Britain, but it was, because I don't know that I've seen Americans putting out statistics because perhaps they're even worse, but the one in Britain was that they had come out to 13% representation of Black, Indigenous, people of color, but they call it BAME, same kind of designation, in publishing, and it had sort of been static for 2 years. And so there was like some sort of collective angst about, and why is this, and how can we address this? And yeah, so industries around the world are trying to grapple with this.
Absolutely. Yeah. And everyone at the personal level, that it's work we all have to do at the personal level and in community also. One of the things that I've really loved this, well, I guess, I mean, this year in particular, because all we do is stay home and read books, right? But I found
Gosh darn, I hate it.
so hard.
Yeah.
Because my kids are home with me 24/7, I have a lot of input on their curriculum. They go to distance learning through school, and their school actually has a lot of BIPOC content. They're always doing a Native American story, or they Maya Angelou poem, or I don't know. It just goes on and on. They do these amazing pieces. But then I supplement that with conversations about race and immigration because of the books we're reading. One of my daughter's little one's favorites is Front Desk by Kelly Yang, which is about an immigrant family. And there's a sequel. And I think her favorite Christmas present was getting the hardcover sequel to that book. And then we read it and we still talk about it. She talked about it at school the other day and told everybody they should read these 2 books to learn about immigration. And I've been thrilled as a parent to be able to have books that are so important and engaging and beautifully written with characters that are it's just so good, you know. It's just, the books are so good, and to be able to have my daughter just really want to engage and then want to talk about the issues, it gives me hope that as their generation grows up, that that publishing will hopefully continue to increase space for BIPOC writers.
Yeah, that's great that there's a children's book that's the equivalent of an earworm. It's like you can't not pass it on and like infect other people. That's great.
Yeah, it's so good.
What I really like about seeking out booktubers of color, but also writers of color, which is harder on BookTube, is that I get to see them talk and share their opinions where I would not normally find those spaces or be invited to those spaces in real life. So they've chosen to go public with their opinions and experiences, and I'm very grateful for that, because like I said, there's like, would I be invited to someone in Louisiana's front room to talk about why they don't read Katrina books, or like some of the stuff about nonfiction books about the prison system and how hard-hitting they are and why they have such an effect, so there's I don't know what it is about the interface, but I think it encourages people to be vulnerable sometimes, and that ends up being like a sharing relationship that it's really hard to cultivate as an adult, just as we know, like it's harder to start friendships as an adult. So I feel like, yes, there's definitely a line between real friends and online friends, and we should definitely, be cognizant of that boundary. But even just hearing and listening to others' experiences, it's just like a whole new world that opens up, which is great.
That's really incredible. And it's also, like you said before about BookTube, it has to do with listening and processing someone else's perspective. And a lot of the times spaces are hard. Yeah, the accessibility of being in a space without pushing your way in, where you're invited into a space to hear someone's perspective about what it's like to be who they are and what it's like to read a book that they feel is not conducive to conversation, or not appropriate or stereotypical, or whatever the book issues or questions are. There's just a lot to learn.
Yeah. What you might find online normally is sort of what gets through all those gauntlets. And so the listicles or the reading club books that are recommended by Black writers, for example, will be the same 10 in a given month period. And you're kind of like, there's a lot more diversity in that landscape than we're seeing. And so when you hear from people who are finding small Black publishing companies that's like, oh, gold mine. Like, what is this issue of Black communism that I've never heard about, or this another biography of Malcolm X that like opens up a whole new vista. So it's really good, really good opportunities. The next one you've got organized special book events. I think we can skip that. I mean, share hard won industry info. Um, what experiences I have, sharing when asked. Let's see, what expertise I've earned, and just sharing it. What do you think about that during original intent and pandemic version, I guess?
It's about the same, except I get fewer inquiries. Often when pre-COVID, I would speak once a month to writing workshops at schools, at universities, at festivals, book festivals. And those were always opportunities for me to share what I've learned and earned as a publisher, knowing that I can also say I'm also a writer. I also write books and essays, and I know what it's like to sit on the other side of the desk, and I'll tell you what you need to know, and I'll answer your questions and be transparent in a way that feels really important to writers. Well, as you know, writing is such an emotional thing for people who do it, because we're putting our hearts and our souls on the line. We are wanting to communicate a great story and characters that matter. And especially before you get that first book deal, trying to figure out how you take your beloved piece into the world. What are the options? What are the possibilities? What is the most empowering? Without hearing from people in the industry, it's really hard to make those decisions, and it's really easy to feel incredibly discouraged. I know so many sad writers who are like, oh, well, I wrote one book and it didn't sell and I'm done. And, there are just so many options out there. And so I like to tell people about how it works. In fact, I love talking about metadata and distribution, and they're really geeky stuff that people outside the industry they don't have access to. So I like to be the key that opens up that door and helps them understand how to, when they're looking for a small press for their book, how to understand the about page and what their distribution is actually going to do for them or not do for them. So.
Okay, here's a follow-up question. Do you think you need different flavors of community for the different phases of the writing or the book business? So it occurred to me when you were talking, like it feels like the writers pre-publication, like a writing group, was one type of community, but then you also want people who are excited about the marketing and the networking online at this time, because they're the ones who are going to share your stuff and be excited and follow you because they have similar interests or are in the same genre, say. And then after, I don't know, what other section would you want? People who are in the business side and looking at which ads work or which placement is best for my cover, this sort of thing. And so it's kind of, I don't know if this is, there's a name for this phenomenon, but when you have different circles of friends and when they overlap, it's just sort of weird because they don't know the same things about you. And, it's just kind of this weird thing that happens in adult life, I guess. But I think in the book community, there's definitely self-selection in terms of phases or purposes, and that seems pretty natural and helpful to me. What does that bring up for you to observe?
I think so too. I'm one of those people who is in some people's overlapping circles, to use your Venn diagram kind of
yeah
view. Because I'm a writer, in my writing group, people ask me publishing questions, or when they get to the next step, I'm like, I gotcha. I'm here. I can talk you through this. So I can do both. I can be a member of a critique group and just like everybody else, but I can then also help them demystify the next pieces if they're new to it. And certainly I give people the bad review speech a lot. Like, it's okay if you get a bad review, because that means that you've reached outside your demographic. That means that a reader has found your book who isn't within your target market, and that just means your book is out there. And so that's good. I feel like it's important to share that piece, because, and a lot of people in writing groups, I don't know, the longer a writing group, our writing group has stayed together for quite a long time, and I'm still part of it, but a lot of people have published now. And so even though bringing in marketing people or social media friends could be really good for your book, I feel like if you're in a group where multiple people have had publishing experiences, you all kind of, everybody's boats lift at the same time, or in tandem, or one after the other,
Right.
because as some of the writers go through the process of publishing, they can then hold out their hand and help the next people.
Yeah, I will say, as one little point of expertise gained that supports your theory of um, bad reviews being good, is that on YouTube, actually, when someone thumbs down a video, it doesn't count against you. It counts as engagement, and that's like the absolute value of engagement. So you have another like tick in your column, and it doesn't matter that it's a thumbs down. So it's kind of like if you have people who are hating on your video, you're like, bring it on, I'll just mute you and you can keep boosting my video. Which I've not had happen, but just so people out there know. Yeah.
That's great. I don't do well with the idea of voting or ranking, or like,
Yeah.
well, the thumbs down looks so scary. And so now I can look at any YouTube video and go like, oh, that person has engagement. That's not a bad thing. Thank you for sharing that insight. Now I feel better.
As long as you can manage not to take it personally, which, for some things I can do and some things it's harder to do. So
it can be really hard.
Yeah. All right. You've got carry business cards.
Yeah. I was going through like, I want to say like 1,000 a year. It was a little bit over the top, but I was going to a lot of conferences and I would speak, and then whoosh, all these people would talk to me, and I'd be like, here you go, here you go, here you go. And a lot of people just keep the business card for the future. Every once in a while, somebody does reach out for a specific question or in response to what I said, or a thank you. But I just had to keep reprinting business cards. And this year, I don't have any. I used to keep a couple in my backpack. I don't even carry them right now because I'm not seeing anybody. There's no interaction I have with anybody outside my little bubble. So
I think the online equivalent for me has been to remember to post that default, like where to find me online, to all the places that I want to highlight, and remember to put it in every place so that people aren't like, who's this person? Like, what is she doing? And yeah, cred. Here's my credentials. Like, yeah. So.
That's really smart.
Create a community anthology to showcase your neighbor writers' talents. Buy local. This is Main Street. Woohoo! Okay, so that's the last piece. I think I've seen people doing this, especially in the last year or two, for charitable causes. So they'll say, because of this natural disaster or this thing, let's do this writing pieces on this topic and ship proceeds to this emergency fund and whatnot. And that's a great initiative, I think. Elizabeth Mitchell and her writing name, her professional name is Elle Mitchell now, so I'm never sure whether to say, but we were contemplating doing submissions for some type of anthology, and just sort of like, not the time. So there's a lot going on, and I know you've done 2.
I've done more than 2.
Okay, that's how you started out. So I've got like the history in my head. Maybe I'm not updated.
The very first one was called Brave on the Page. And the idea was for anybody who was a writer in Oregon could submit a little 250-word essay, and I was going to put them all in a book. And I was going to print at the espresso book machine at Powell's, which is like, it's gone now, but it was a sort of a glorified Xerox machine that would print out a book and bind.
It's gone?
It's gone. Yeah, it's been gone for a couple years.
What? Last time I was in there, they still had it. That was only like a year and a half ago, right?
I think it's been longer. It's been a while, but maybe not too long. Yeah, so I wanted to be able to create something that was an accessible platform that I wasn't going to take people out if I didn't like their piece, or, it was just like, let's all come together and create an anthology of something that's really important, which is community and talking about writing. And anybody was welcome to submit. I would do things differently now because I didn't really know what I was doing at the time. But I like the idea of inviting people. And even if they didn't have a book out or they only had one essay published,
Yeah.
if they spent the time writing and considered themselves as a writer, they belong to this community. And so that's really how I founded my press. From there, we went straight into fiction. And we've done a couple anthologies and collections. Our next one is Dispatches from Anaris, which is an Ursula K. Le Guin anthology that's coming
Oh,
out in the fall, edited by Susan DeFreitas.
oh,
And
cool.
yeah, and so that is, or Portland authors telling stories in tribute to Le Guin's legacy. So it's all fiction, and it has each piece has some resonance with Le Guin's work.
Amazing. That sounds
Yeah.
really good. Do you have a cover for that?
We do have a cover, but it is actually in revision right now.
Okay.
So, I was in a COVID anthology earlier this year called Alone Together that Central Avenue put out, and Jennifer Helpt was the editor. And the idea was to raise money, back to your idea of community and connection. The idea was to raise money for booksellers through the BINK program, which helps booksellers who have financial needs. And they did a really big print run, and they had, I can't remember how many people contributed, but it was a mix of interviews and essays. I think there was some poetry. There might have been a few short stories. I think it was primarily nonfiction though. And that went out and got a big boost from booksellers across the US. And it was really special for me to have a piece in that book because it details a time from the perspective of writers. And it came out, I guess it came out over the summer, but we were putting it together in like April or May, submitting our pieces. And so
Early in the game.
exactly. It was created early in the pandemic and retains its value, and I think has a historical value that will also become apparent. And I felt really lucky to be part of that. And that wasn't a regional community, but community was determined as writers, community of writers talking about what everyday life is like now.
So we've had to talk about community in a lot of different ways we can still gather virtually. And so it's the end of February, which means it's the end of Black History Month. And I'm going to be pointing to a lot of my favorite videos in my next installment, I believe, if we have the dates right. So I would love to call out some of the names or suggestions that you have in terms of diverse local authors of color, some of the designations. When we were talking about walking into a bookstore and looking at the local shelf, the experience that I had in terms of finding local authors of color to support and highlight and sort of get out of my niche was pretty thin, I think, because as a used bookseller on Mississippi Avenue, for some reason, we didn't get a lot of authors of color's books, at least not that were alive. So the last one I got before we closed was Survival Math, and I just finished this for my first Patreon book club, and we had a really good discussion about it. So that was super interesting. He is an author who grew up in Portland but escaped to New York, and this is a lot of his adventures and sort of looking back at his growing up, which was fraught with all sorts of complex relationships and temptations and choices. And so he reflects on those and what he thinks about them now and how they shaped him as a person a little bit. And March is coming up, but I'm reading historical novels for March of the Moderns. This is like the little bingo board I put together, which is not current. That's between 1901 and 1945. So I don't think anyone's still going to be living. But yeah, I just wanted to give you a chance to say, who should you check out? Local, diverse.
I actually haven't read her book yet, so here's another recommendation on my TBR list is Kesha Ajose Fisher's No God Like the Mother. She's local to Portland, and I believe her book won the Oregon Book Award for fiction.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, and I've read one of her short stories, which appears in Dispatches from Anaris, our Le Guin collection.
Nice.
So I'm now a little bit familiar with her work, but I'm really excited to read her novel. And honestly, if it had been normal times, I would have gone to Annie Bloom's and walked in and found it on the shelf and brought it out. But when it comes to actually ordering books, I try to like um, amass some things that my kids want or that I want, and then I put in a big order. I just haven't done it yet. And then I'm really looking forward to a friend of mine, Juhae Kim, has a novel coming out that sounds really fabulous, and I think it's coming out at the end of this year. And she's a local Portland writer who I met at the Portland Book Festival 2 years ago, I think. So I'm really excited for her. I know that it's a really big deal for an author to have their debut coming out.
Awesome. Very cool. And then did you have one of your own writers that has a recent release that we should all go check out?
Sure. We have coming out on March 2nd, Wife, Daughter, Self
Oh my
by
gosh.
Beth.
Perfect timing.
And it is a memoir and essays. Beth has written more than 30 books.
Oh my gosh.
She's incredible. She's written a lot of middle grade. She's written one of the preeminent books on how to write memoir called Handling the Truth. And this book is a memoir in essays, but it's also a study in craft. And she also talks about what it's like being a writer married to an artist. And she talks about starting Juncture Workshops, which is a program that she and her husband run together.
Oh, wow.
And so it's very much about craft and community and self all the way through. And the language is just exquisite. And I feel like my writer brain grew 8 sizes by getting to edit someone who is so smart about publishing and so smart about writing. I've just adored the whole experience.
Awesome. Very cool. All right. Well, I will find out those links and put them in the description below. But yeah, that sort of concludes. I will say if Beth writes a lot of middle grade, that's perfect because there's this thing on BookTube called Middle Grade March, and several booktubers I know are going to be reading lots of middle grade books. So I'll definitely point them to her collection wherever I can find those, probably on bookshop.org.
Absolutely. Yeah, she's written a lot of really amazing ones and a couple memoirs too. And I love reading her work aloud to my kids because the language is so good and the story moves. In fact, we're reading The Great Upending right now, which is one of her more recent ones. And my daughter yesterday asked, can you ask her to write another book, a sequel to this? Because we're not even done with it, but she's captured and captivated by the characters in the story. And she's already like, I want the next one, but there isn't a next one.
Right.
Like, oh,
do that too. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Margaret, for hosting me. That was really fun.
Yeah, thank you. The email. Can you do that? Oh, there's the sun. Hello, and there's the bean shadow. Hello, bean.